She threatened my life over a speeding ticket, daring me to prove that even a billionaire's wife wasn't above the law. I decided to accept her dare. The scent of burnt rubber and entitlement hung heavy in the humid afternoon air. I'd been a cop for 15 years, and I could smell that particular combination from a mile away. It always started with a car that cost more than my house, driven by someone who believed traffic laws were merely suggestions for the common folk. Today's offender was a pearl-white Bentley Continental, a land yacht that had just screamed through a 25-mile-per-hour school zone at nearly 60. The flashing lights in her rearview mirror seemed to personally offend the vehicle. I approached the driver's side, my hand resting lightly on my holstered weapon, a habit born from years on the road. The window slid down with a silent, electric hum, revealing a woman who looked like she was sculpted from ice and money. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. Diamond earrings the size of small grapes glittered in her ears, and her sunglasses were so large they hid half her face, reflecting a distorted fisheye version of me. "License and registration, please," I said, my voice flat and professional. She didn't move. She simply tilted her head, a gesture of profound confusion, as if I'd just asked her to explain quantum physics in Mandarin. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice a low, throaty purr that probably charmed politicians and CEOs, but just sounded like static to me. "Your license and registration, ma'am. You were doing 55 in a school zone." She let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound like cracking ice. "Officer," she said, finally removing her sunglasses to fix me with a pair of piercing blue eyes, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm in a hurry. The kids in that school would like to grow up, ma'am. That's why the speed limit is 25. I kept my tone even, refusing to take the bait. I'd dealt with her type before. The key was to be a brick wall. Unmovable, unemotional. She sighed, a dramatic, long-suffering sound, and rummaged through a handbag that probably had its own mortgage. She produced a wallet and handed me a driver's license. Eleonora Vance. The name didn't ring a bell, but the address was on the waterfront, in the private, gated community they called Billionaire's Row. I took the license back to my patrol car to run it. Clean record. Of course it was. People like Eleanor Vance didn't get records. They had lawyers who made records disappear. I wrote the ticket for reckless endangerment and speeding in a school zone. The fines would be a pittance to her, but the points on her license and the reckless charge would be a little harder to scrub away. When I walked back to the Bentley, her perfectly composed mask had slipped. A frown line was etched between her brows. I handed her the license and the citation. She didn't take them. She stared at the yellow slip of paper as if it were a dead rat. "You can't be serious," she hissed. "Do you have any idea who my husband is?" Here we go, the classic line. "Ma'am, unless your husband is the governor with a signed pardon in his pocket, you're getting this ticket." Her eyes narrowed to slits. "My husband is Sterling Vance. Does that name mean anything to you, you little public servant?" It did, actually. Vance Capital. He was a titan of industry, a man who bought and sold companies like they were baseball cards. His face was plastered on business magazines, and now I knew his wife was a menace in a 2-ton luxury missile. "It means you can certainly afford the fine," I said, holding the ticket out again. "Sign here. It's not an admission of guilt." That's when she snapped. Her manicured hand shot out, not to take the pen, but to knock the ticket book from my grasp. It clattered onto the pavement. "You listen to me, you pathetic, overpaid meter maid," she spat, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "I will not be inconvenienced by the likes of you. I will call my husband, and by the time he is done, you will be directing traffic in the sewer. I will own your badge. I will see to it that your pension vanishes. I will find out where you live, officer." She leaned forward, squinting to read my name tag. "Miller. And I will make your life a living hell. Do you understand me?" My blood ran cold. This wasn't the usual empty threat. The specificity, the pure, unadulterated hatred in her eyes. She meant every word. My training kicked in, my heart rate steadying. My mind was a steel trap. I was calm, I was professional, but inside a switch had been flipped. I bent down slowly, picked up the ticket book, and brushed it off. I stood back up and looked her directly in the eye. I didn't say a word. I just tapped the small black box on my chest, the one with the blinking red light that had been recording since the moment I stepped out of my car. Her perfectly made-up face went slack. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving 2 bright spots of rouge standing out like a clown's makeup. The realization dawned on her. The horror of what she'd just said, now captured forever in high-definition audio and video. Her threat wasn't just a threat anymore. It was evidence. I pulled out my handcuffs. The metallic click as I unlatched them from my belt seemed to echo in the sudden, deafening silence. "Eleanor Vance," I said, my voice as cold and hard as the steel in my hand. "You are under arrest for threatening a police officer. Please step out of the car and place your hands behind your back." For a moment she just stared at the handcuffs, then back at my face, a flicker of genuine shock in her eyes. It was the look of someone who had never been told no in her entire adult life. Then the shock curdled into pure, unadulterated rage. "You wouldn't dare," she breathed, her voice low and trembling. She actually laughed, a brittle, hysterical sound. "You're making the biggest mistake of your career, Officer Miller." "The mistake was threatening a cop, ma'am. Now, are you going to step out of the car, or am I going to have to assist you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she snatched her phone from the passenger seat, her fingers flying across the screen. I didn't wait. I reached in, unlocked the door, and opened it wide. Out of the car, now. When she still refused to move, I took her by the arm. Her muscles tensed under my grip. The fabric of her silk blouse felt ridiculously smooth against my calloused hand. "Don't you touch me!" she shrieked, trying to wrench her arm away. The phone clattered to the floor mat. That was it. I guided her out of the driver's seat, her heels sinking slightly into the soft asphalt. She was surprisingly strong, but resisting arrest is a dance I've done 100 times. I spun her around and secured her wrists behind her back. The satisfying click of the cuffs echoed off the side of the Bentley. I read her Miranda rights as she stood there, trembling, her face a mask of disbelief. The irony of her diamond bracelets clinking against the police-issue steel was not lost on me. The ride to the station was silent, but it was a loud silence. I could feel her eyes boring into the back of my head. In the rearview mirror I saw her reflection, a fallen queen in the grubby back seat of a Ford Explorer, her perfect makeup now slightly smudged. She wasn't crying. She was calculating. Booking her was a fresh new hell. She refused to answer questions, refused to stand still for her mugshot, and sneered at the fingerprinting ink as if I'd asked her to bathe in sewage. My sergeant, a grizzled old-timer named Kowalski, watched the whole circus from his desk, a small appreciative smile on his face. "You poked the bear, Miller," he muttered as I walked past. "Hell, you put the bear in a cage." Eleanor Vance was placed in a holding cell. I could hear her demanding her lawyer, her husband, the ambassador to France for all I knew. I ignored it and went to my desk to write the most detailed, airtight report of my life. Every word she said, every threat she made, I transcribed it verbatim from my body cam footage. I attached the video file, triple-checked everything, and hit send. Let them try to make this go away. An hour later they arrived. Not just a lawyer, but a team of them, walking into our humble precinct like a conquering army. They were all sharp suits and $1,000 shoes, led by a man whose face was all sharp angles and predatory smiles. But the man who followed them, the man who made the air in the room feel suddenly thin and cold, was Sterling Vance. He wasn't big or physically intimidating. He was of average height, slender, with graying temples and a face that was handsome in a severe, unforgiving way. He didn't look at anyone, didn't raise his voice, he just existed in the space, and the space bent around him. My captain, a decent man named Davis, came out of his office to meet them. "There's been a grave misunderstanding," the lead lawyer began, his voice smooth as oil. Sterling Vance held up a single hand, and the lawyer fell silent instantly. Vance's eyes, the same piercing blue as his wife's, finally found me sitting at my desk. He didn't glare. He didn't threaten. He just looked at me, a calm, analytical gaze that felt like being dissected under a microscope. He was assessing me, weighing me, calculating the exact amount of force required to crush me. We were all ushered into Captain Davis's small, cluttered office. The lead lawyer, a man named Caprio, did all the talking. He painted a picture of a stressed, frightened woman being harassed by an overzealous officer on a power trip. He talked about my record, my commendations, but framed them as signs of aggression. It was masterful, twisting my professionalism into a flaw. "We're prepared to file a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against this department and Officer Miller personally for harassment, false arrest, and emotional distress," Caprio said, leaning back in his chair. Captain Davis didn't flinch. "I've seen the body cam footage, Mr. Caprio. Your client threatened my officer. Plain and simple. The arrest was by the book." Sterling Vance, who had been silent the entire time, finally spoke. His voice was quiet, almost gentle, which made it all the more terrifying. "Everyone makes mistakes, Captain. This officer made one. Now you can compound that mistake, or you can rectify it. Release my wife, drop these ridiculous charges, and we can all forget this unfortunate incident ever happened." It wasn't a request. It was a command. Captain Davis looked from Vance to me. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He was a good man, but he was also a man who understood politics, understood pressure. He knew the kind of storm a man like Vance could bring down on him, on the whole department. Caprio smiled, sensing a crack in the dam. Perhaps you need some more persuasion. Sterling, may I? Vance gave a slight nod. Caprio pulled out his phone. The district attorney is a very dear friend of the Vance family, he said, his eyes locking on mine. I believe you'll find he has a different perspective on this entire situation. He's expecting my call. Just as he said it, the phone on Captain Davis's desk began to ring, its shrill cry cutting through the tense silence. The caller ID flashed on the small screen, and every drop of blood in my body turned to ice. It read, District Attorney's Office. Captain Davis stared at the ringing phone like it was a coiled snake. The smug, predatory smile on Caprio's face widened. He hadn't made the call yet. This was a power play, a perfectly timed demonstration of his reach. He was showing us that the call had already been made, that wheels were turning in a world high above our pay grade, and that we were already losing. My captain, to his credit, let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Then, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire department, he picked it up. Davis here. He listened, his face impassive, but I could see a muscle twitching in his jaw. Yes, sir, I understand. Yes, I have the report right here. No, sir, I've seen the footage myself. Another pause. The air in the office was so thick I felt like I was breathing syrup. With all due respect, sir, the threat was explicit. A longer silence followed. I watched Captain Davis's posture change. He slumped ever so slightly in his chair, the fight visibly draining out of him. He looked over at me, his eyes full of a weary apology. Yes, sir, he said finally, his voice flat with defeat. I'll take care of it. He hung up the phone without another word. The silence that fell was heavier than before. Sterling Vance hadn't moved a muscle, his expression unchanged. He had expected this outcome. It was as natural to him as the sun rising. Well, Caprio said, steepling his fingers, it seems we have a resolution. Captain Davis cleared his throat. Officer Miller, he said, not looking at me. Void the citation. The arrest report will be misplaced. Release Mrs. Vance immediately. With our sincerest apologies for the inconvenience. The words hit me like a physical blow. Sincerest apologies? I'd been threatened, my family had been threatened, and now I was supposed to apologize for it. I opened my mouth to protest, to say something, anything, but the look Davis shot me was a clear command. Stand down. I felt a white-hot rage building in my chest, so intense it made my hands tremble. I stood up, my chair scraping harshly against the floor. I walked out of the office without a word, feeling the collective gaze of Vance and his legal sharks on my back. I felt humiliated, neutered. The badge on my chest felt like a cheap prop. I processed Eleanor Vance's release. Her smirking face as she signed the paperwork was almost more than I could bear. She didn't say a word to me. She didn't have to. Her eyes said it all. I told you so. I own you. As she walked out of the precinct, flanked by her husband and their lawyers, she turned and gave me one last look, a triumphant, venomous glare that promised this wasn't over. The next few weeks were a special kind of hell. The story was successfully buried, as I knew it would be, but within the department the whispers started. I was the cop who caved, the guy who picked a fight he couldn't win and got slapped down by the DA. Some of my fellow officers avoided my eyes. Others looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt. My credibility, the most valuable thing a cop has, was in tatters. But what they didn't know was that I hadn't given up. The original arrest report may have been misplaced, but I had a copy. And more importantly, I had the original bodycam footage stored on a secure, encrypted drive, hidden far away from the precinct's servers. I watched it over and over again, listening to her voice, her explicit threats, her absolute certainty that she was above the law. Every viewing fueled the cold, hard knot of resolve in my gut. I started digging. Off the clock, late at night, I fell down a rabbit hole of all things Vance. Sterling Vance was a ghost, his business dealings shrouded in layers of shell corporations and high-priced legal firewalls. But Eleonora was different. She was a socialite. She craved the spotlight. She had a history, and people with histories leave trails. I found her old name, Eleonora Popoff, an immigrant from a small Eastern Bloc country. She'd come to the States with nothing, worked as a model, a hostess, always on the fringes of wealth until she'd landed the ultimate prize. Sterling Vance. I found old articles, society pages, mentions of her fiery temper, a quickly hushed-up incident at a charity gala, a former assistant who'd signed an ironclad NDA after a disagreement. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Then I got a break. A late-night email from a burner account. The message was short and cryptic. "You're not the first one," she threatened. "There are others." The Caprio lawsuit. I had no idea who it was from, but the mention of Caprio, their lead lawyer, was specific. I started digging into his case history, specifically cases involving the Vances. It took me almost a week of sifting through legal databases, but I found it. A sealed case from 5 years prior. A civil suit for wrongful termination. The plaintiff was a young woman, a former personal assistant to Eleanor Vance. The case had been settled out of court for an undisclosed, but rumored to be massive sum. The key detail? The plaintiff's original complaint included an allegation of threats of physical and financial harm. The lawyer who had represented her was a small-time civil attorney, a guy named David Chen. I found his office in a strip mall, sandwiched between a laundromat and a nail salon. It was a world away from Caprio's polished downtown high-rise. Chen was wary at first, but when I explained who I was and what I was investigating, something shifted in his eyes. He couldn't talk about the specifics of the case because of the NDA his client had signed. "They buried us," he said, his voice bitter. "Caprio and his team, they threatened to countersue my client into oblivion, accused her of extortion, leaked fabricated, embarrassing stories about her to the tabloids. They ruin people, officer. That's what they do." He wouldn't give me his client's name. He couldn't. But as I was leaving, he stopped me. "I can't help you," he said, "but maybe this can." He slid a single, folded piece of paper across his desk. "This was evidence that was sealed along with the case. It's a copy. I probably shouldn't have it. If anyone asks, you didn't get it from me." I unfolded the paper in my car. It was a transcript of a voicemail. The words were chillingly familiar, the venom unmistakable. It was Eleonora screaming at the assistant, threatening to ruin her life, to have her deported, to make sure she never worked in this country again. It was the exact same pattern, the same vitriol she had directed at me. But it was the very last line of the transcript that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was a threat so specific, so dark, it went far beyond anything she had said to me. As I read the final terrifying sentence, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered, and a voice I recognized instantly, cool, calm, and deadly, spoke into my ear. "Officer Miller," said Sterling Vance, "I believe it's time you and I had a private conversation. Stop digging. You have no idea what you're messing with." That call was a mistake. It was the first unforced error Sterling Vance had made, and it told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't just cleaning up his wife's mess anymore. He was scared. That voicemail transcript wasn't just evidence of another threat. It was a key to something much darker, something he had gone to great lengths to bury. And by calling me personally, he confirmed it. "Is that a threat, Mr. Vance?" I asked, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. A beat of silence. "It's advice," he said, his tone like chipped ice. "Advice you would be wise to take. My wife is passionate. But I am not. Forget what you think you found. Let it go." He hung up. I didn't let it go. I took a personal day, then another. I went to David Chen's former client. Finding her wasn't easy. She'd changed her name and moved to a different state, trying to disappear. When I finally sat down with her in a quiet coffee shop hundreds of miles from home, she was terrified. I showed her the transcript. I told her about my own experience, played her a snippet of the audio from my body cam. I didn't push. I just laid it all out. "He said he'd kill my brother back home," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. That was the last line from the transcript. It wasn't just a threat to ruin a life. It was a threat to end one. "Eleonora. She found out my family was involved with some political dissidents. She said Sterling had connections, that one phone call could make my brother disappear into a black site prison. I believed her. I still do. This was it. This was the leverage. This crossed the line from a civil matter into felony territory. Extortion, witness tampering, and a credible terrorist threat. The NDA she signed was powerful, but it couldn't be used to conceal a felony. Armed with this new testimony, I didn't go back to my captain or the DA. They were compromised. I went to the one place Sterling Vance's money and influence couldn't easily reach, the FBI. I met with 2 agents from the Public Corruption Unit in a sterile, anonymous office. I laid out everything, my body cam footage, the story of the suppressed arrest, Vance's phone call to me, the voicemail transcript, and the sworn, videotaped testimony from Eleonora's former assistant. I handed them my entire meticulously organized case file on a silver platter. They listened without interruption, their faces grim and unreadable. When I finished, one of them finally spoke. "Thank you, Officer Miller. We'll take it from here." For a month there was nothing. The silence was deafening. I went back to work, kept my head down, and endured the whispers. I started to think maybe Vance had been right. Maybe his reach extended even further than I imagined. Maybe I had just handed my career over to a black hole. Then, one Tuesday morning, the world exploded. News alerts lit up every phone in the precinct. The FBI had raided the Vance Capital offices downtown and their waterfront mansion. Sterling and Eleonora Vance were both taken into custody. The initial charges were stunning. A litany of financial crimes for Sterling: fraud, money laundering, sanctions violations related to those connections Eleonora had threatened to use. And for Eleonora, the charges stemmed directly from my file. Threatening a public official, witness tampering, and extortion. But the real bombshell was Caprio. The FBI, using my case as a starting point, had uncovered a pattern of behavior. They found evidence that Caprio, on behalf of the Vances and other wealthy clients, had been systematically bribing and blackmailing public officials for years. The district attorney was implicated. He resigned in disgrace hours after the news broke. The whole corrupt house of cards came tumbling down. The trial was a media circus. I was the prosecution's star witness in the case against Eleonora. When I took the stand and my body cam footage was played for the jury, the courtroom was silent. Seeing it on the big screen, her snarling face, hearing the pure venom in her voice was even more impactful than I remembered. Her threats, once so terrifying, now just sounded pathetic. Eleonora was found guilty on all counts. Sterling, facing a mountain of evidence on the financial charges and hoping for leniency, pleaded guilty and agreed to cooperate against his former associates, including Caprio. The sentencing day for their lawyer, Caprio, was the true climax. The courtroom was packed. He stood before the judge, a shell of the arrogant man who had tried to intimidate me in my captain's office. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for being tough on corruption, looked down at him over her glasses. "You took an oath to uphold the law," she said, her voice ringing with authority. "Instead, you sold it to the highest bidder. You used your position of power to protect the guilty, to intimidate the innocent, and to rot the very foundations of the justice system you swore to serve." She sentenced him to 10 years in federal prison, no parole. And as the bailiffs led him away in handcuffs, something incredible happened. A quiet smattering of applause started in the back of the courtroom. It came from the other cops, the public defenders, the court clerks, the people who had seen his brand of corrupt, moneyed justice firsthand for years. The applause grew, swelling into a wave of cathartic release that filled the entire room. I stood there with my fellow officers, and yes, I clapped too. It wasn't for vengeance, it was for the simple, beautiful fact that for once the system had actually worked. Justice, for once, hadn't been for sale.